I work for Pima County Indigent Defense Services. My contact information is on the last slide. This PowerPoint is already loaded onto the community forum. If you don't know where that is, community.newdon.com. You can search for my name, or it's also under JDA. I really love this cartoon, so I got this. You haven't heard what the problem is yet. How can you recommend building a database to solve it? Well, we always build a database, and we'll need coffee mugs for that project team. And the problem is that we have poor processors. Well, that could be our slogan on our mugs. The reason I like this also is because I did build a JDA that kind of causes problems on the servers when it runs. It uses a lot of the memory. So you always want to be careful of that when you're going through JDA. Most importantly is images. If it's like almost golden that when you call support, you get a timeout when running a JDA. The first thing they always are going to ask you is there an image in it? And I'm like, no, there's not an image. I do not put images in my templates. But that's one thing I wanted to just say really quickly is don't put images in your JDA if you're pulling in any other queries, because it's going to probably cause a problem when it's trying to load it. So sub docs are great because they allow for easy changes. There's whether it's just changing some verbiage, whether you're trying to actually move the sentences around. The other thing that it allows for, sub docs also make for quick coding and a template. You guys heard earlier this morning, if you were at the panel discussion, I have 400 JDAs. The reason I'm able to do that is because I have so many sub documents. I mean, of those 400, some of them are sub docs. And so when I got the same header on every single one, I don't have to code that in every single time. I don't even have to copy and paste. I just put in the query, and then it pulls it. Headers and footers, as I said, that's the main one. And then you can pull those sub-documents by the agency. So for example, all of my agencies use the same motion to continue. So the headers and the footers change based upon the agency, but that core of the motion to continue is just the same. And so it really made it easy as far as drop-down control. And then the last, if you have documents in multiple languages, you can avoid those drop-down lists. And I'm going to go into Spanish and actually going to get away from sub-documents when I talk about Spanish for a second to give you a sweet query that translates months and days into Spanish for you so that when you're pulling the template, you automatically have that. And everything I'm doing here, by the way, will have data source queries. So for those of you who are not IT people, you're just a regular administrator and you don't really deal with data source queries, it's all going to be here, so you just have to give it to your IT person, and they can just copy and paste. So yeah, I definitely believe in why doing it twice. So JustWare sub docs, like I just kind of admitted, they're just JDAs. And then you're just telling a specific template, hey, let's pull this portion of a document and put it into another portion of a document. And so you're just kind of building on stuff that you've already done, just redoing it, reusing everything that you've already used before. The following capabilities that are within a JDA, in case you don't know, is that you can query data within a case or name record. You can modify formatting within the JDA itself as opposed to each individual motion. So that's really key. If the one thing I will say is some people are having issues with sub-documents inheriting the main document style. If you're experiencing that problem, it is not entirely JustWare's fault. It's actually a Word issue. I was Googling some information about other Word versions of templates, so to speak, where they do like mail merges and stuff. And when you're pulling in another document into it, it almost always inherits the main document style. So the most important part about that is just to be careful when you're doing the previews and the testing. See how it looks. Make sure that your users are going to like the way it looks. And the biggest one is margins. If you've got half-inch margins on one document and then inch margins on another, that half-inch margin document is going to inherit the inch margin, which means if you had things aligned just right, that alignment might just go completely berserk. So that is one unfortunate thing, but it's not entirely a JustWare issue, it's just a Word issue. But they should get around Word. They need to rewrite Microsoft at this point, I think. So in summary, why are sub-documents great? Change verbiage one time, you update multiple documents. You guys heard this morning, we had to move from one office to another. We had to go into all of those templates, change the address, and then right afterwards we had to change the name of the director. And so shortly after that, when we had to change the name of the director again, we were already in JustWare. And so I changed it on one document, and bam, all of my documents were updated. I didn't have to worry about that problem. And if it was filed wrong in court, I knew that person wasn't using JustWare. So that was another key. So really quickly, I just kind of want to show you what a document would look like in the subdocument. So this is obviously just a letter, and at the top, that's one subdocument right there. That's a header. And then right here, I have actually my address line. That's a subdocument because I pull that in a lot of different letters. And so I decided, you know what? I'm constantly having to put those in the letters. Why don't I just make that its own subdocument? That way, if I ever want to change the format of it, if I ever am changing the query that pulls the address, which I actually did recently. So that was really nice. I was able to just go into that subdocument, modify the way I'm pulling the addresses, and then it updated every single letter that's pulling an address. This is the actual main body of the letter that they were pulling. So that's the only thing that exists in there. And then this right here is another subdocument, the signature line. And then at the bottom, the footer is another subdocument. Now, some agencies, their headers have the address and information up there. And then some agencies, it's in the footer. So then what I did was I just created an empty document for the subdocuments of those other agencies, just created a blank Word document so that it still pulls it. It doesn't pull an error, and it just leaves it blank so nobody knows. So that's what I did. So when to use JustWare subdocuments, again, headers, footers, common language, multiple versions of the same letter based upon varying data, and then also multiple language versions of the same letter. And the reason I do that is, again, Michael Rusin asked this morning, how do you manage all those dropdowns? I don't need to have an intro letter English, intro letter Spanish. I just have an intro letter, and then it pulls it based upon whether the client speaks Spanish or English. And we'll get into that into the data source queries. Now we're going to get into how the miracle occurs. I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. So I love this one too. I always like that because people are always like, yeah, just do it. So how do you query a subdocument? Here it is. This is the query to pull a subdocument is just the % with the box bracket subdocument, the location in the JDA database, and then the JDA name. So I gave you an example here. I created in my JDA database, I created a subdocuments folder because it just kind of helped me to keep everything organized to an extent. And then here's a picture of it. So here's my subdocuments right here, and then each agency has their own folder, and then it just kind of goes down from there. And actually, I'm now redoing this because about a month and a half ago, I found out that they allow subfolders underneath the folders, and so now I'm going to reorganize everything, which will be a lot of code for one time, but it'll be worth it because I have way too many subdocuments. So really quickly, this list, I forgot to say this. So this list can become very cumbersome, and for those of you who are using your JDAs, you may want to start looking at them and say, okay, well, how many of my JDAs are pulling what? How can I organize this in any way? And someone actually in a class right before lunch asked me, hey, how can I get a list of the JDAs that I can play with? And I was like, oh yeah, well that's actually really easy. And I just wrote him the SQL query to get it, not thinking that actually Nudon already built a report to do this. It's called JustWare code tables. So I left the SQL query in there for those of you who like SQL Server Management better than reports. But there is a JustWare code tables, and then what it looks like is right here. I just added this at lunch, and you can select this code tables here and select documents, and then you can export that to a CSV and pull that into Excel, which is definitely really nice if you're trying to do like a whole new implementation of your JDAs to be able to have everything that you can play around in, insert notes, etc. So that's there, or you can use the SQL query. So subdocs from multiple agencies. So when you're pulling in a subdocument, you've got your subdoc query, and then inside that subdoc query, you're going to use if, and then I'm using the JustWare Attorney Defense Active, and then the case agency name ID. And so you're going to need to get this out of your database, out of your code tables. You get the case agency name ID. So this is the public defenders. And so if this is the name ID, then it's pulling the subdocument of PD motion header because that's their motion header. Else if, and then I got another agency, and then at some point you should do an else and then an end if. I actually didn't write an else in here. I should have copied them. Oh, I know why I didn't. Yeah. You'll see why I didn't take the whole copy and paste, but there really should be one more else at the end there, and I apologize. And actually, I usually put in the else an error that this template did not have an agency associated with it. Contact your JustWare administrator right after the else. I'm really sorry that that's not there actually. I'll fix that in the comments online because that's really something. If it doesn't work, if the subdocument doesn't get pulled, all the users are going to see is just blank area on their paper, and And so if they don't realize the reason that it didn't come up, then they'll just assume that the document doesn't work, and they never contact you for some reason. So I tried to make sure that it's clear why it didn't work, and hey, let me know. Although a lot of times it's really that they didn't insert the data in the case, and that's why the subdocument wasn't pulled. So this is what my JDA looks like inside the JDA editor. I've got at the very top my header query that pulls a subdocument, which then has, and you'll see in a second, the query for each agency. You'll see how that looks in a second. And then I have my letter address line, and then I've got my main content of the letter with other data stuff coming in. And then I've got my signature query and then my footer query. So that is exactly what it should look like on yours when you're done. And so what you're pulling is you're pulling the subdoc. This is the header. This is the letter header subdoc at the top. And then inside that subdocument is a query to pull another subdocument based upon the agency. And because the reason that I did this was if I was in here and I had all that code at the top up there, which I do in certain situations, then when an agency is added or an agency is modified, or I for some reason want to change the way that that subdocument is pulled in, I'd have to go into every single letter and do it again. And there's just no reason to ever have to repeat yourself with subdocuments. So with that, I'm pulling a subdocument that in essence then, based upon the agency, pulls another subdocument to tertiary level. So that's exactly how my next subdocument looks in Word. It's just exactly like that. So there's my else at the end. That's good. I have an example somewhere. So yeah, that should always be there, that else. So now I'm going to go into Spanish templates. So we know how to pull by agencies now. So going into Spanish templates, you're going to just create a data source query based upon the variable defining the language. So in my case, I use a name attribute. I don't know if anybody here uses case attributes, but hopefully you have somebody who can write data source query for you to change it. And then you're going to need to create a subdocument query to pull the correct document. So I first had to say go and get whether they speak Spanish. And then afterwards, I'll create, and you'll see all of this, I'll create a subdoc query based upon whether they speak Spanish or not. And then lastly, because I didn't want users to have to go in and write the dates, because that's pretty much is the exact opposite of what the purpose of JDAs are, I then inputted translations for variables, i.e. months and days, which you can use, and if you don't use Spanish, you use something else, you can absolutely replace your variables with that. And so I actually want to add in that I gave an option of choosing based only if they speak the language, because a lot of my secretaries said, well, when they're marked Spanish speaking, we don't actually always send the letter in Spanish. We still a lot of times send it in English. I don't know why, but I was like, whatever, that's fine. So I did build a query that only if they speak Spanish, then ask them, and by using a dialogue. So I use a dialogue to say, if they speak Spanish, ask them, do they want the letter in Spanish or English? And then based upon how they answer the dialogue, it pulls the appropriate subdocument from there. So there's actually multiple levels in that. So first, I'm just going to give you the data source query, which pulls whether they speak Spanish or not. There's no reason to type this down or write this down. It's already on the community forum. So don't try to get this really quickly because I'm going to move on. So up at the top, I just used the name attribute code. And everything in red, by the way, are things that you should modify in your database. I put them in red so that you can know, oh, this is specific to Pima County's database, so you can know to go and grab your code. And however you name your data source query, you can keep mine, or you can do it however you want. I just pulled in the name attribute code and only returned it if they're Spanish speaking, or SS in my case. And so that's the data source query to go ahead and tell JDA whether they're Spanish speaking or not. Then I built a dialogue. Here's a beautiful screenshot of the dialogue, so you can easily build it exactly like I did. Put whatever language you want in there. Make sure to note whatever value you use. So I just called it Spanish speaking. Here's my dialogue. I used radio buttons. I recommend radio buttons in this particular example. Now that we have our dialogue, we have our query to say, hey, are they Spanish speaking or not? I now pull in the, if they are Spanish speaking, then ask them whether they want it in Spanish or English, which is this Spanish speaking.spanish.value. SP was the value that I used for Spanish. And then if they answer that they want it in Spanish, go ahead and pull the PD Spanish intro letter. Else, because it's the only other else is English, go ahead and pull the English intro letter. And then this is really important. This, I stared at this if, else, end if, else, end if, which is all like embedded in itself for like 10 minutes to make sure that I had it all correct. Then there's a next else, because if they're not Spanish speaking at the very top up here, that's why I kept it in black and blue, was to try to say that this and this is based upon the Spanish speaking, whether they speak Spanish, and then this right here is based upon the dialogue of the masking. You don't need to have it in separate colors in your JDA Sub Doc, but I felt like it would help separate it on the screen, because really in JDA I just stared at it for like 10 minutes and was like, I got that right? Okay, so I just wanted to scare everybody. This is actually my intro letter in JDA. There's not even a single thing in there.
The other one, that was easier.
I know, isn't it? Man, I tell you. Yeah, that is, I always laugh when I open this one because I'm like, man. And yeah, I really do need to just color code this for my purposes. Does the color code impact the
As long as you're inside the fill point, you can make that whatever you want.
Yeah, inside the fill point itself. So just inside those box brackets. And actually, you can see right here that it actually goes onto a second page, but it's just this again. But yeah, that's what it should look like when you're done. But I mean, really, I tried to make sure that I kind of broke them down into sections for you guys so that you can easily copy and paste and know what you're doing when you're copying and pasting it. And also, most of you probably don't have 5 agencies within one JustWare that you're trying to do subdocuments for. I've really found it to be a great help, and we just kind of pull everything based upon it. And as an administrator, it saves you so much time in managing your code tables and managing your code partitioning by doing it this way. This is all about you. It has nothing to do with your users whatsoever, because this just saves you so much time in the end. It's really actually quite impressive. And so then the one thing I needed to do was I needed to translate to Spanish. Because I said, you know what, if I'm just going to pull it in and it's going to say June, it's going to look terrible. And I don't want the users to have to manually enter the date. Like, that is exactly opposite why we went with JustWare. So Dennis told me about this case date part, and I was like, sweet. And so then from there, was able to get all of this to put together. And so what we did was, it's pulling the month up there, and then based upon the month, it's just going to return a number. And so I just got, all the different months right there, the translations. And then the same thing with the weekday. And it's, again, just pulling it on the event date from JW50 event. And then all that is just right there like that. And so it just translates the days and it translates the months. And then the numbers, of course, are the same. If you're in another language where the numbers are different, I don't know. I can help you. Email me. We can talk. But that's it. You just copy and paste it and just call it whatever you want. I'm calling it, I tried to rewrite all the data source codes to take out the Pima for you guys. All right, well, that one has Pima in it. You probably want to take that part out. But I just call it Spanish Future Court Events. And then, inside there, you can, inside the template itself, you could tell it what event you want. I definitely recommend, if you have like a multi-diverse, agency where you're really needing to send out 2 different types of letters, copying and pasting this, because this was like gold. I talked about in the class, when a doc is an exception to the sub docs. There's a lot of times where the headers pull everything that I want, but then they also, in this motion, they need to designate the estimated time of the hearing. They need to tell the judge the estimated time, and it has to be in the header up here. And I'm like, well, I don't want to insert that for every single one. And I could possibly write up there an if query that if the main document is named this, but that would just be crazy too. So I was like, okay, well, how am I going to do this? I need something to notate in there, what I can do. And so, as most of you know, you can't do notes in JDA. So what we did was I contacted support and was like, look, I just need to be able to do nothing. And so we wrote this, and essentially, it never asks the users anything. It's just a do nothing right there. And you'll just type your notes in the do nothing field, which will look like this. So you'll say if do nothing.new equals 1, you know, and then there's the else. You still got to keep the code. And so I just put the following documents do not have this header attached as a subdocument, so they need to be edited separately. And so every time I'm editing that subdocument, I'm reminded right here that, hey, I need to go and modify these 2 documents as a part of that. And so I don't get those calls or those emails from users saying, hey, the phone number is still wrong on this one. And so that's something that's been really helpful to remind me of doing that. Do something to keep yourself some notes, because when you start getting into, you know, the amount of subdocuments that you have, it just becomes crazy. So I actually left a lot of time for questions because I think that there should be questions. I mean, unless you guys are all like, no, I've got it. I've got these queries down. Sweet. Well, you know, then let's just start building some subdocs right now. Yes. Yes.
You ever do subdocs for signatures?
Yeah. So for one, the way I was doing signatures was going to be with images. I don't know how you could do it without images. Yeah. As I said at the beginning, they always ask me, every time I get a timeout error, you know, would you have an image in it? Which they might as well just say, we don't support images in JDA. So my PowerPoint from last year is on the community forum still, and it has in there how to do it. You know, you're pulling the name ID of the attorney, and then you're basically, you need to, what I did was I saved, because we were originally going to do it, but then we also, a bunch of attorneys started screaming, you know, about, you know, are there any attorneys in the room? No? All right. Yeah, so a bunch of attorneys, I just wanted to know, actually. You know, it's fine. I'm still going to say it. A bunch of attorneys started screaming, you know, about, you know, oh, well, that's, you know, you can't just start putting my signatures on anything and blah, 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 blah. And I have no control over my signature now, which is a really powerful thing. And like, I walked, the first attorney that ever screamed at me, I walked over to their secretary's desk who has a stamp. And I said, I could come in here at 5:30 and bam, your signature is on everything. You know, get over it. You lost your privacy like 15 years ago when you made that stamp. So, but so many of them screamed that my boss was like, you know what, let's just not do it. They're too, you know, angry about it. So, you know, you can do it, but I just warn you about the images, and maybe you want to work with support, you know, to make sure that you're doing it right. But it is possible. So you just name the pictures as the name ID number of the attorney, and then the query, you know, grabs their name ID number, and then based upon the name ID number, it pulls the correct document upon, you know, based upon that. Yeah, you've done that same way? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of documents.
Yeah, they do the exact same thing.
What they do is like, they'll just sign on the paper, scan it to me, and I just copy the image to a document.
Yeah.
So that will automatically compress, then I save it, and then grab that signature and put it on the.
Cool. Yeah, so what he was saying is he does get them to sign on a blank piece of paper, and then he scans it in and compresses the image. Yeah.
Those are on the community forum again, you said?
Yeah. So it's community.newdon.com, and you can just, you know, either search my name or under JDA, they're right there. Yeah. So the last thing, I released this morning because there's no other questions. I released this morning and wanted to give this to everybody. It's in this PowerPoint. Also, I decided to upload it as a separate PowerPoint under JustWare, but this is the business rule of duplicate names. Yes.
Is it going to impact the performance anyway?
Yeah, great question. He just said, is it going to impact the performance of the users? You know what? It is so fast. I can't believe how fast it is. I mean, you try searching for a name in JustWare, and you're like staring at it, and you're like, you're ready, you know. And then, but this, I hit Control S, and almost immediately, it is like, nope, you have a duplicate match. I mean, I don't know what Burbank did when he built this get data, but it was incredible. I mean, it is the best thing. And actually, he just told me this morning, and I'll insert it in a comment if it works. Him and I both think that I can actually insert the name ID of the matching name in the error too. And if I can do that, yeah, we think we can. So I will add the comment on the community forum if I'm able to do that with what I did to the get data change. So I also added an exception for a security profile. I see no logical reason to have an exception to be able to create a duplicate name. However, I was worried that, you know, at some point in life I leave, I do know of a way to do this. So what we did is in the get data, there's a get data of the user's security schema ID. So the user that's doing this, it finds out what security profiles they belong to. If they belong to this security profile that I built called bypass dupe names, it'll let them go ahead and create the duplicate name. Nobody belongs to that security group right now because there's just no reason for it. I mean, not even me. I don't even belong to it because I'm like, I don't want to be able to create a duplicate name. So you won't be able to read the get data. I'm going to show the get data in a second, but this is what the business rule looks like. The if else is just this. And again, this is all on the community forum. And then the terminate, and there's the error. And I'm going to hopefully insert in, at row ID, .name ID in there, and that I should be able to get that into the error so that it actually tells them the matching name, which will be totally sweet. Yeah, so that's the business rule. So hopefully you got. Yeah. It's going to be in size 4 font because it's really long. But the point of it was it's in text so that you can go online, Control-A, Control-C, put it into Word, give it a size 10 font, and then you can read it again. So I just wanted to make sure that it was easy for you guys to be able to utilize it later and not just create some image that was, or create 4 slides that you need to make sure you copy and paste the right way. I removed middle name on this. Level 2, I think, still requires a match of the first initial of the middle name, and I removed that out of the get data because you know what? If the first name and the last name match and the DOB or the SSN match, let's face it, they're the same person. Somebody just typed something wrong. I should add that little thing. And then the security schema ID is right here. So you can't see that, but just Google, security schema ID right there, or not Google it, search for it in the text and you'll be able to find it. And then you'll want to modify that to whatever your security group's ID number is. And the ID number, should have given you a screenshot of that. When you're in the security groups, you have to open up the security group, and at the very top, it'll tell you that it's like 15 of 33 or 33 of 33. That's the security schema ID. I think it's just my contact info after that. Yeah. And then found this really cool tech watch. It runs forever, never needs a battery. That's impossible. It can't run without using energy. Yeah, sure it can. I just have to give this little knob a twist. I always like that one. Anyway, so there's my contact info. If you have any questions about Sub Docs, if you're running into a problem, feel free to email me. Support is also incredible. If you've never called support, I have no idea how you're surviving. They're amazing. But if you're running into some really complicated subdoc query that you're like, I just need some help, feel free to email me. I'd be glad to take a look at it and see what we can figure out. So, but hopefully you can copy and paste everything, and that should save you guys a ton of time not having to write it all.